344. To what extent even we are still pious. It is said with good reason that convictions have no civic rights in the domain of science. It is only when a conviction voluntarily condescends to the modesty of an hypothesis, a preliminary standpoint for experiment, or a regulative of fiction, that its access to the realm of knowledge and a certain value therein can be conceded. Always, however, with the restriction that it must remain under police supervision, under the police of our distrust. Regarded more accurately, however, does not this imply that only when a conviction ceases to be a conviction can it obtain admission into science? Does not the discipline of the scientific spirit just commence when one no longer harbours any conviction? It is probably so, only it remains to be asked whether, in order that this discipline may commence, it is not necessary that there should already be a conviction, and in fact one so imperative and absolute that it makes a sacrifice of all other convictions. One sees that science also rests on a belief. There is no science at all without premises. The question whether truth is necessary must not merely be affirmed beforehand, but must be affirmed to such an extent that the principle of belief or conviction finds expression, that there is nothing more necessary than truth, and in comparison with it everything else has only a secondary value. This absolute will to truth, what is it? Is it the will not to allow ourselves to be deceived? Is it the will not to deceive? For the will to truth could also be interpreted in this fashion, provided one includes under the generalization, I will not deceive, the special case, I will not deceive myself. But why not deceive? Why not allow oneself to be deceived? Let it be noted that the reason for the former eventuality belonged to a category quite different from those from the latter. One does not want to be deceived oneself, under the supposition that it is injurious, dangerous, or fatal to be deceived. In this sense, science would be a prolonged process of caution, foresight, and utility, against which, however, one might reasonably make objections. What is not wishing to be deceived really less injurious, less dangerous, less fatal? What do you know of the character of existence in all its phases to be able to decide whether the greater advantage is on the side of absolute distrust or of absolute trustfulness? In case, however, of both being necessary, much trusting and much distrusting, whence then should science derive the absolute belief, the conviction on which it rests, that truth is more important than anything else, even than every other conviction? The conviction could not have arisen if truth and untruth had both continually proved themselves to be useful, as is the case. Thus the belief in science, which now undeniably exists, cannot have had its origin in such a utilitarian calculation, but rather in spite of the fact of the inutility and dangerousness of the will to truth, of truth at all costs being continually demonstrated. At all costs, alas, we understand that sufficiently well, after having sacrificed and slaughtered one belief after another at this altar. Consequently, will to truth does not imply, I will not allow myself to be deceived. But there is no other alternative. I will not deceive, not even myself, and thus we have reached the realm of morality. For let one just ask oneself fairly, why wilt thou not deceive? Especially if it should seem, as it does seem, as if life were laid out with a view to appearance. I mean with a view to error, deceit, dissimulation, delusion, self-delusion, and when on the other hand it is a matter of fact that the great type of life has always manifested itself on the side of the most unscrupulous. And I will pause here, whereas usually I will butcher my way through French or Latin. This Greek word I'm not even going to try and attempt. Hopefully you can see that. So if there's anyone out there who can read that word and knows how to pronounce it, please let me know. Such an intention might, perhaps, to express it mildly, be a piece of quixotism, a little enthusiastic craziness. It might also, however, be something worse, namely a destructive principle, hostile to life, will to truth. That might be a concealed will to death. Thus the question, why is there science, leads back to the moral problem. What in general is the purpose of morality? If life, nature and history are non-moral, there is no doubt that the conscientious man, in the daring and extreme sense in which he is presupposed by the belief in science, affirms thereby a world other than that of life, nature and history. And in so far as he affirms this other world, what must he not just thereby deny its counterpart, this world, our world? But what I have in view will now be understood, namely, that it is always a metaphysical belief on which our belief in science rests, and that even we knowing ones of today, the godless and anti-metaphysical, still take our fire from the conflagration kindled by a belief, a millennium old, the Christian belief, which was also the belief of Plato, that God is truth, and that the truth is divine. But what if this itself always becomes more untrustworthy? What if nothing any longer proves itself divine, except it be error, blindness and falsehood? What if God himself turns out to be our most persistent lie?